أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى سيدنا محمد وصحبه وبارك وسلم أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the health, the strength, and of course in these trying times the opportunity to have this Jummah message from the Azhar Masjid in terms of a video recording. We wish to thank the people involved. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them abundantly, inshaAllah. Brothers and sisters, as we all know, we are in a new norm, that of isolation, the lockdown. And of course the challenge is, how do we engage and respond to this new norm? Definitely as Muslims, we immediately and correctly say to ourselves, let's refer to the Quran and the Sunnah. What does the Quran and the Sunnah advise us? Because that is our recourse. That is the core of our belief. And the reason why we say that this is a new norm, it is because we are faced with new challenges, new aspects. Already in this short period of time, we have been confronted with questions such as, is it permissible to close the masajid? Is it permissible not to have Jummah? The janazas, what to do, and many more questions which will still be coming our way. And of course, we know the responses, the emotional responses, the fear responses. Open the masjids, we want to make salah and jama'ah, make the Jummahs, this, that, and the other. This really is unprecedented. We are really in a new norm, and we really have to respond to it. But how do we respond to it? How can we elicit from the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam some basis, some rationale to respond to it as Muslims should respond, and that is via or on the basis of the Quran and the Sunnah. We want to refer then, as a starting point, to build our case, the conversation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Very famous conversation, where the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam presented Mu'adh ibn Jabal with three questions. Firstly, you are going on your way to Yemen to govern. So, what will be your primary source of reference? The Quran, Ya Rasulullah, Mu'adh answered. And if it is not explicit in the Quran, then I will refer to the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the third question, and what if it's not explicit in the Sunnah? Then, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I will use my opinion based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, from this conversation, we can gather that because Mu'adh ibn Jabal rahmatullahi alayhi was going to a new area in terms of culture, cultural differences, traditions, etc. and so forth, he will have to have made new approaches. He will have to think anew. And we know this was condoned by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because after Mu'adh answered the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam on that third question, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to the classical literature, smiled, embraced Mu'adh ibn Jabal, showing the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's satisfaction. So they firstly, according to the Sunnah, to think anew, to respond to new situations, to new norms. Now, in our 21st century, this situation we are in, and accepting that the Quran and the Sunnah are timeless without a shadow of doubt as Muslims, we then also have to think anew, have new approaches, of course, due to our situation. What does the Quran say? Our primary source. The Quran informs us لِقَوْمِ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, that this Quran is for a people who think. A people who think. And the very first ayah of the first revelation, Surah Alaq, Allah informs us, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, اقرأ بِسْمِ رَبِّكَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ. An injunction once again to think anew. To think anew, a new dimension, a new vista opening, intellectual vista opening, as to you now have to move away from thinking and then worshipping the idols to thinking and worshipping the one and only true Ilah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here already in these two ayahs, brothers and sisters, we can see the seamless nexus, connection between the revelation and reason or rationality. And from this we can gather and see that Islam encourages a very progressive process of thinking, that of reflective, critical, and incisive thinking. And I want to quote a philosopher, and I just want to expand a bit on that, because this quote that I'm going to give is very, very relevant to us here in the 21st century and in this situation. This philosopher Alvin Toffler, when he says, and I quote, illiteracy in the 21st century will not be people who cannot write or read, but instead it will be people who will refuse to learn, to unlearn, and to relearn. In other words, people who refuse to learn, to reflect. People who refuse to unlearn, to critically analyze on that on which they have reflected, and to relearn, to draw incisive conclusions, to see if the conclusions drawn on the critical analysis of the observations of the reflections are adding value to the day and age and to the situation. What this philosopher is saying in the 21st century, what the Quran is encouraging humanity already since the 7th century, mashallah. So in terms of that, we look at our situation, as Muslims, and perhaps we must think how non-reflective, uncritical, and thus non-incisive in our thinking we have become. Perhaps, as a Mufaddal would say, how we have allowed the teachings of Islam and many of its intellectual traditions to have become fossilized or buried beneath layers of forgetfulness. And so we see and try to understand our response to a situation which we are in. a response to a situation that we never ever experienced before. And we see how we are responding. We are responding with shock, fear, total disorientation. Hence, we see the survival calls in distressful manners of open the masajids, perform the Jummahs, and so on and so forth. This is what's happening. Brothers and sisters, we have to be very careful, and especially as Muslims, especially as people of Iqra. We have to be careful that our faith should be evidenced and intellectually based and not emotional. Look at the Shahada. What do we say? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no other ilah except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We take that for granted, not so. But let's just think about it in the context of our talk. I bear witness that there is no other ilah except Allah. With what do I bear witness? I have to bear witness with evidence. And how do I get that evidence? By means of observation and therefore reflection. How do I know that that evidence is true? I have to critically analyze that evidence to come to an incisive and real core decision. And this is what makes up our faith. Not blind faith, but evidence-based faith. Also Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith says, Al-hikmah balatul mu'min. Wisdom, hikmah, is that which is always elusive to the true believer. And wisdom is a result of incisive thinking. In other words, the true believer will always spend his or her time in reflection and critically analyzing, critical thinking, what has been reflected upon, and then drawing incisive conclusions and realizing that as soon as I'm finished drawing a conclusion, the process starts all over again, because everything changes and moves on. And that is why Muhammad ﷺ is saying in this hadith that wisdom is always elusive to the true believer, meaning that the true believer always finds him or herself guilty of not doing enough. So there again, our faith, how we should respond to our situation of lockdown. Not emotionally. Of course there's emotion involved, but the emotion must not override the intellectual. But we have to have a thinking approach to understand. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us, Surah Ra'ad, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. That verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the condition of a people unless they change what is in themselves. حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم, unless they change what is within themselves. Meaning, referring to a paradigm shift, a rupturing of thinking, to unlearn and to relearn upon that reflection, to arrive at incisive decisions. This is what the Quran and the Sunnah is informing humanity is informing especially those, ourselves, that have accepted that the Quran and the Sunnah is without doubt the truth on the basis of evidence. And therefore, what is the meaning of all this? Of course, we can gather and deduce that the meaning of all this, it is to analyze the situation in order to respond correctly and appropriately for the benefit and value of all. Because without a shadow of doubt, human life must always be valued. Thus, our manner of thinking, it must coincide with the Quran and the Sunnah, which always call for the connection, the nexus between rationality, reason, and revelation. Hence the ayah, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. And of course, لقوم يتفكرون. That seamless connection between the reason and revelation. And especially in our situation, this is so necessary that we inform ourselves, that we arm ourselves with this type of sensible thinking approach, not only to make sense of the situation, but to respond positively to the situation, and not to degenerate into boredom, restlessness, irresponsibleness, etc., and so forth. And this connection between the reason and revelation, coming back to that, as the scholar Khalid Abu Fadl said in a lecture in the library of Alexandria, Egypt, once, when he said, ما يجب عقلا يجب شرعا وما يجب عقلا ما يجب شرعا. Meaning, whatever is mandated by reason is so mandated shar'an by sharia. And that which is not mandated by reason, ما يجب شرعا, it is not mandated by sharia. Self-explanatory. So easy to understand. And especially in our day and age. And this is a contemporary scholar, beautifully putting into context how our minds should be working, and especially so in this situation and condition of lockdown, which can become very dangerous if we do not know how to handle it. Dangerous due to irresponsible behavior. Danger in putting other people's lives in danger. And even Imam Hazali, centuries before us, said, also lending credence to this nexus, this connection between the reason and the revelation, where Imam Hazali said, and I quote, whoever refuse reason, refuse revelation, as reason proves the veracity of revelation. So beautiful, and of course so relevant and so important. So thus, this situation, this new norm, this lockdown we're in, it specifically calls for a response that we do what is humanly possible in order that our actions leaves us with no doubt that we are doing our best under these trying circumstances. That's all we can do. That's all we can do if we want to do it in a responsible way. That should be our focus, our starting point, to do what is humanly possible that will leave us without doubt that we are trying to do our best under these trying circumstances. And this type of attitude complements the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to us in a hadith, دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. Leave that which leaves you with doubt for that which leaves you without doubt. In other words, do we doubt that if we stay at home, adhering to the medical advice that our president so eloquently explained to us in national broadcasts, on the advice of the medical people, the fraternity, that the best way to conquer this virus is to stay at home, to isolate, and that the virus runs its course and dies down. I heard on BBC now the other evening, where a doctor said, we can keep you breathing on the ventilator, but we here in the hospital, we cannot fix the virus. But you can fix the virus by staying at home, because it will just run its course of its lifetime and will die. So the more we isolate, the more we increase the chances of, as they call it in their terms, flattening the curve and bringing this to an end, inshallah. So on such basis, our response to the present situation as Muslims, as part of the universal human family, would be, firstly, the safety of all is secured and ensured as far as humanly possible by means of isolation lockdown. Secondly, the masajid do not then become places or in danger of becoming places of contamination and centers of spreading the sickness. And thirdly, that janazas and all other activities are handled in a way to ensure the safety of all as per the advice of the experts, inshallah. And brothers and sisters, in such a way, we may then start to realize the beauty of sabr, the beauty of patience. As Allah says, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ, that the virtue of patience, it is a beautiful virtue. Meaning that if the person responds to a situation in this thinking manner, which the Quran and the Sunnah advises us, that person or community or family would then realize how they can turn a challenge into an opportunity of growth and development. That is the beauty of patience. That is the beauty of perseverance. As Allah also says, وَاللَّهُ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ, and Allah is with those who persevere, those who are patient. Once again, what does it mean? Doesn't mean Allah is near to us physically. Allah doesn't need the space or time. It means if we adhere to the Quran and Sunnah, if we in that way, as we've explained, make the Quran and Sunnah the close, intimate companions of ourselves, and especially in this time, we will understand or start to understand, and inshallah may we understand the figurative nearness of Allah, the companionship of the Quran and the Sunnah, the beauty of having the Quran and the Sunnah as close, intimate companions, because of the vistas of opportunities of growth and development it opens in our mind, which we can pursue. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us that with our effort, inshaAllah. So brothers and sisters, in conclusion, let us use our time in lockdown to reflect upon the past, the present, and inshaAllah strategize for a successful future, inshaAllah. We make dua that this serious situation is taken away soon, inshaAllah. Ameen. Juma Mubarak to you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran.